The billionaire froze in shock. When his fiancée attacked the maid, she fought back in a way no one expected. She was on her knees, scrubbing a floor that wasn't even dirty, when the slap cracked across her face, so hard the room went silent. The billionaire in the doorway didn't move, didn't breathe. He watched the woman he was about to marry raise her hand a second time, and watched his housekeeper, calm as still water, look her straight in the eyes and say 4 words that would end everything. 4 words. That's all it took. And what happened in the next 60 seconds would change 3 lives forever. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. If you love stories about real strength, quiet dignity, and the kind of justice that feels earned, you're exactly where you need to be tonight. Before we start, drop a comment and let me know, what country are you watching from? Now settle in, because this is one of the most unforgettable stories we've ever told. The wind off Lake Michigan cut through the glass towers of downtown Chicago at 6 in the morning, but on the 41st floor of the Cole Tower, Ethan Cole was already awake. He always was. 34 years old, founder of Cole Dynamics, a man whose net worth had 11 zeros and whose calendar had no white space, Ethan had built an empire out of sleepless nights and unanswered phone calls to his own family. He stood at the window in a charcoal robe, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the sun bleed orange over the water, and for one quiet moment, he looked less like a titan of industry and more like a tired, lonely man. 3 miles away, in a modest 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on the south side, Maria Torres was already dressed. 28 years old, hair pulled back, sneakers laced tight. She moved through the small kitchen like she'd rehearsed the motions 1,000 times, because she had. She packed a lunch for her 6-year-old son, Diego, who was still half asleep at the table, chin resting on his fist. "Mama, do you have to go so early?" he mumbled. Maria knelt down to his eye level, brushing his hair back. "The sooner I go, Mijo, the sooner I come home to you. And Abuela's soup will be ready by then, HM?" Diego smiled, and that smile was the reason Maria got up every single day at 4:45 a.m., took 2 buses, and spent 9 hours cleaning a mansion that cost more than she'd earn in 3 lifetimes. Would you keep showing up with grace every single day for someone who might never truly see you? That's the question Maria lived inside of, and she never once let it turn her bitter. She'd been working for the Cole family for exactly 8 months, hired not by Ethan himself, but by his estate manager, a brisk woman named Carol who ran background checks like a Secret Service agent. Maria had passed everything, every check, every reference, every trial week, because Maria Torres did not cut corners. Not in cleaning a house, and not in raising a son alone since her husband, a construction worker, had died in a scaffolding accident 3 years earlier. The Cole estate in Lincoln Park was less a house and more a small kingdom, 11 bedrooms, a private chef's kitchen, a study lined with first-edition books Ethan rarely had time to read. Maria worked alongside 4 other staff members, but she was the one Ethan noticed. In the small, quiet ways a busy man notices things he doesn't have time to examine. She was the one who remembered he liked his coffee black on stressful mornings and with a splash of cream on the days he seemed lighter. She was the one who left a bowl of soup outside his study door the week he'd caught the flu and refused to slow down. She never lingered, never asked for credit. She simply did her work, and did it with a kind of dignity that made the mansion feel, in small corners, like an actual home. "Ethan doesn't even know your name," her co-worker Renata teased her one afternoon as they folded linens in the laundry room. "You could disappear tomorrow, and he'd just think a ghost stopped leaving soup." "He knows my name," Maria said simply. "He said it once. In March." Renata laughed. "You counted." Maria smiled but didn't answer. The truth was, she hadn't meant to count. It had just stuck with her, the way a kind word sticks with someone who doesn't hear many of them. Then there was Vanessa Kingston. 30 years old, raised on the North Shore in a house with a name instead of a number, Vanessa was the kind of beautiful that stopped conversations. Sharp cheekbones, ink-black hair always perfectly styled, a laugh she'd trained since childhood to sound effortless at galas. She and Ethan had been engaged for 4 months, after a whirlwind courtship that Chicago's society magazines had practically live-tweeted. On paper, they were perfect. The self-made billionaire and the old-money socialite. A power couple built for magazine covers. But underneath the diamonds and the practiced smile, Vanessa Kingston was drowning, and almost no one knew it. Her father's investment firm, Kingston and Associates, a name that had opened doors for 3 generations, was quietly collapsing. Bad bets on a real estate fund had left the family exposed to nearly $40 million in debt, hidden behind non-disclosure agreements and a very expensive PR firm. Vanessa's engagement to Ethan Cole wasn't romance to her family. It was a rescue plan. Her mother had said it plainly over tea, 2 weeks before the engagement party. Marry well, Vanessa, and none of this will matter. Marry well, and we survive. Vanessa told herself she loved Ethan. Some days, she almost believed it. But the pressure sat on her chest like a stone she could never quite put down, and lately, that pressure had started leaking out sideways, in short tempers, in cold silences, in the particular way she'd begun looking at the household staff, as if their calm, uncomplicated lives were a personal insult to her own unraveling one. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Vanessa first noticed Maria the way you notice a splinter. She'd come to the estate to finalize wedding seating charts, snapping at a florist over the phone, when she saw Ethan pause in the hallway, actually stop walking, to ask Maria how her son's cough was doing. Better. Thank you for asking, Mr. Cole, Maria said, eyes down, moving past him with a stack of towels. It was nothing. 6 seconds, maybe 7. But Vanessa stood frozen at the top of the staircase, phone still pressed to her ear, watching the exchange with an expression that had nothing to do with wedding flowers. Why would a woman who is everything feel threatened by a maid who is almost nothing? Hold on to that question. It's going to matter more than you think. Vanessa, the florist's voice crackled through the phone. Are you still there? I'm here, Vanessa said flatly, watching Maria disappear down the hall. Actually, change of plans. I want the maid's staff seated somewhere else during the rehearsal dinner setup. Somewhere they won't be underfoot. It was a small, petty request. The florist didn't think twice about it. But it was the first quiet stone Vanessa placed on a path that would end in something much larger. 2 months slipped by, each one tightening the wire a little more. Vanessa's family situation worsened. Her father, David Kingston, began making late-night calls to her cell phone, his voice thinner each time, more desperate. The wedding needs to happen sooner, Vanessa. We need the joint accounts open. We need this finalized. She started skimming small amounts from the household budget Ethan had generously handed her control over. A few hundred here, a few thousand there, always explained away as vendor deposits or wedding contingencies. It was easy. Ethan trusted her completely, and trust, Vanessa had learned, was the easiest thing in the world to exploit when no one was watching closely. Except someone was watching. Not spying, just present. Maria cleaned that house 5 days a week, and in the process of dusting studies and organizing mail, she had begun to notice things that didn't add up. A florist invoice for $8,000 that seemed absurdly high. A catering deposit paid to an account that wasn't the catering company's. She noticed the way Vanessa's face changed when bank statements arrived. The flicker of panic quickly smoothed into practiced calm. Maria said nothing. It wasn't her business, and in her experience, staff who spoke out of turn about their employer's finances didn't stay employed for long. She had Diego to think about. She had rent. She kept her head down and her hands busy. But keeping quiet didn't protect her from Vanessa's growing resentment. It had become a pattern by then, small cruelties dressed up as nothing at all. Vanessa would accidentally spill coffee near freshly mopped floors and watch Maria clean it without a word of apology. She'd criticize Maria's work in front of guests, loud enough to be heard, quiet enough to seem casual. The service in this house has really declined, she said once at a dinner party, swirling her wine, eyes flicking toward Maria as she cleared plates. I suppose you get what you pay for. Ethan wasn't often present for these moments. He traveled constantly, Tokyo, London, a due diligence trip to Austin that stretched from 3 days to 11. When he was home, he was usually locked in his study, and the small cruelties happened in the spaces he didn't occupy. But Diego's cough had turned into something worse, a fever that spiked to 103 one Thursday night. Sending Maria into a panic, she tried desperately to hide the next morning as she showed up to work anyway, exhausted, eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night at the ER. "You look terrible," Renata whispered as they set up the breakfast trays. "Go home, Maria. Carol will understand." "I can't," Maria said quietly. "We used almost everything on the ER copay. I need the hours." "What would you do if calling in sick to care for your own child meant you couldn't pay next month's rent?" Maria didn't get to ask that question out loud. She just kept working. It was Ethan, of all people, who noticed first. He found her in the hallway around noon, swaying slightly as she reached to straighten a picture frame, and something in his gut told him to stop. "Maria." His voice was different than usual. Not the distracted, half-present tone he used for most of the house, but something sharper, more attentive. "Are you all right?" She startled, straightening quickly. "Yes, Mr. Cole. I'm fine, thank you." "You don't look fine." He studied her for a long moment. "Sit down, please." It wasn't a request most employers made. Maria hesitated, then sat on the edge of a hallway bench, humiliated at being seen like this, tired, frayed, human. "My son was in the hospital last night," she admitted, because lying to him felt somehow worse than the truth. "He's all right now. Just a bad fever. I didn't want to miss work." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he did something that would have surprised anyone who thought they knew him. He sat down beside her on the bench, not across from her, not above her, but beside her. "Take tomorrow off."
"Paid," he said.
"And send me the hospital bill." "Mr. Cole, I can't." "You can," he said simply. "You will." That's not a negotiation, Maria. It was the first time he'd said her name in months. And she noticed, of course she noticed, that he remembered it perfectly. He didn't see Vanessa watching from the top of the staircase, arms crossed, jaw tight, a bank statement folded in her hand that she'd been about to ask him to sign without reading too closely. That night, alone in her enormous closet, Vanessa stood in front of the mirror in a $5,000 dress she wasn't sure she even liked, and she let herself feel, for one honest moment, the shape of what was actually happening inside her. It wasn't love slipping away. She wasn't even sure it had been love to begin with. It was control. It was the terrifying sense that the only thing standing between her family and total collapse was a marriage she could feel, somehow, impossibly, slipping through her fingers, replaced by 6 seconds of kindness shown to a woman who owned nothing. She picked up her phone and called her father. "We need to move the wedding date up," she said.
"Now."
"Before anything else happens." Meanwhile, in the small apartment above the laundromat, Maria was having her own quiet reckoning. Diego's fever had passed, but the ER bill sat on the kitchen counter for 3 days before she found the courage to open it, and when she finally did, her stomach dropped. Even with the household insurance Ethan technically provided his live-in and part-time staff, the copay alone was more than she made in a week. She sat at the table long after Diego had gone to bed, running numbers on the back of a grocery receipt, trying to figure out which bill could wait another month and which one couldn't. Her mother, Rosa, watched her from the doorway of the small second bedroom, arms crossed over a worn cardigan. "You work too hard for people who don't see you," Rosa said in Spanish, not unkindly, just tired. "Your father used to say the same thing about his job at the plant, working himself into the ground for men who never learned his name." "Mr. Cole knows my name," Maria said quietly, still staring at the numbers. "That's not what I mean, Mija." Rosa sat down across from her, resting a weathered hand over Maria's. "I mean, does he see you? Really see you? Or does he see someone who makes his coffee and disappears?" Maria didn't have an answer that night. She only had the receipt, the numbers, and the tired, familiar ache of trying to hold a family together on a salary that never quite stretched far enough. She thought of her husband, Manuel, and the way he used to tell her that dignity wasn't about what you had. It was about how you carried yourself through what you didn't have. She'd clung to that idea through the funeral, through the first terrifying months of single motherhood, through every long bus ride to a house she'd never be able to afford to live in herself. She folded the receipt, put it in the drawer with the others, and went to check on Diego one more time before bed, because whatever else was uncertain, That boy sleeping soundly under a thin blanket was the one thing in her life that made all of it worth doing again tomorrow. The rehearsal dinner was 3 weeks later, and it should have been perfect. The Cole Estates ballroom had been transformed, white orchids cascading down crystal centerpieces, a string quartet warming up in the corner, 40 of Chicago's most influential people mingling with champagne flutes in hand. Ethan moved through the crowd in a tailored navy suit, shaking hands, accepting congratulations, playing the role of the happy groom-to-be even as something small and unnamed sat uneasy in his chest. Maria worked the event alongside the catering staff, refilling water glasses, clearing empty plates, moving invisibly through the room the way good service staff are trained to do. She'd asked Carol for a double shift. The extra pay would cover Diego's school supplies for the fall, and she moved through the elegant chaos with quiet efficiency, exhausted but steady. It happened at 8:47 p.m., though no one was checking clocks at the time. Vanessa had been drinking, not recklessly, but enough that the careful mask she wore in public had begun to slip at the edges. Her father had called twice during the party, his voice tight with panic each time, whispering that the joint accounts needed to be opened immediately, that a creditor was threatening to go public within the week, that everything depended on this wedding happening on schedule. And then she saw her engagement ring. It was missing, not on her finger. She'd taken it off briefly to wash her hands in the guest bathroom, set it on the marble sink, and when she returned 20 minutes later, distracted and half-drunk on stress and champagne, it was gone. She didn't think. She didn't ask calmly. She saw Maria walking past the hallway with a tray of empty glasses, and something inside Vanessa, months of pressure, fear, resentment, and a desperate need to control something, anything, simply broke. "You." Vanessa's voice cut across the hallway like a blade. "Where is my ring?" Maria stopped, confused. "Miss Kingston, my engagement ring. It was on the bathroom sink. It's gone." Vanessa closed the distance between them fast, her heels clicking sharp against marble. "You've been in and out of that bathroom all night. Did you take it?" Conversation in the nearby hallway died. A few guests turned. Ethan, 20 feet away accepting a toast from an old business partner, hadn't yet noticed, but he would in seconds. "I haven't been in the guest bathroom tonight, Miss Kingston," Maria said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I've been serving the main hall." "Don't lie to me." Vanessa's eyes were bright, glassy, furious. "Do you know what that ring is worth? Do you know what it means to me? I understand you're upset, but I didn't take anything." Have you ever been accused of something you didn't do, in front of a room full of people who assumed the worst simply because of where you stood in the world? That was the moment Maria was living in, and what she did next would define the rest of the story. "Turn out your pockets," Vanessa demanded, voice rising, drawing more eyes now, more silence. "Miss Kingston, that's not necessary. Turn them out." And then it happened. Vanessa, months of unraveling finally snapping loose all at once, grabbed Maria's apron and yanked her forward, and when Maria instinctively pulled back, Vanessa's open palm cracked across her face. The sound was obscene in the sudden silence. A gasp rippled through the hallway. Someone's champagne glass shattered on the marble floor. Ethan turned and froze. He saw Vanessa's hand still raised, saw the red mark blooming across Maria's cheek, saw 40 guests staring in shocked silence, and for one full second, his entire understanding of the woman he was about to marry cracked down the middle. "Vanessa." His voice was low, dangerous in a way none of the guests had ever heard from him. "What are you doing?" "She stole my ring, Ethan." Vanessa's voice cracked, tears springing up now, more performance than pain. "I told her to turn out her pockets, and she refused." "I did not refuse," Maria said quietly, one hand pressed to her burning cheek, but her voice did not shake. "I said it wasn't necessary, because I know I didn't take it." Vanessa lunged again, hand raised a second time, and this is where the story you've heard 100 times would show the maid ducking, crying, running away in humiliation. That is not what Maria Torres did. She caught Vanessa's wrist in midair, not violently, not with anger, but with a calm, immovable strength that stunned the entire hallway into deeper silence. She held it there, steady as stone, and looked Vanessa dead in the eyes. For words, Maria said, quiet enough that only the nearest guests and Ethan could hear it. "Check your other hand." The hallway went utterly still. Vanessa blinked, confused, adrenaline and champagne fogging her thinking, and then, slowly, mechanically, she looked down at her own left hand. The one not raised to strike. The one that had been clutching a small, crumpled cocktail napkin all night without her even realizing it. She unclenched her fingers. The ring fell out and bounced once against the marble floor, spinning in a small, glittering circle before coming to rest at Ethan's feet. She had never taken it off in the bathroom at all. In her stress, her drinking, her spiral of panic about her father's calls, she had absent-mindedly slipped it off somewhere in the ballroom, wrapped it in a napkin without thinking, and carried it in her own hand for 20 minutes while accusing an innocent woman of theft in front of everyone she knew. Nobody moved for what felt like a very long time. Ethan bent down slowly and picked up the ring. He turned it over once in his fingers, and when he looked up, his face had gone pale and hard in a way none of his employees had ever seen. Not angry the way rich men get angry, loud, red-faced, throwing things. Quiet angry. The kind of angry that comes from finally, completely understanding something you should have understood months ago. Everyone found the ring wrapped in a napkin. A nearby guest, an older woman from the Historical Society, murmured to her husband, but it carried, and half the hallway heard it, and the whispering started immediately. Vanessa's face crumpled through several emotions in fast succession: shock, humiliation, and then, most tellingly, a flash of pure panic that had nothing to do with the ring at all. "Ethan, she started. "Not here," Ethan said. His voice was still quiet, but it carried the weight of a man who had built and destroyed multi-million-dollar deals with far less certainty than he had in this exact moment. He turned to Maria, and his expression softened instantly, guilt and concern washing visibly across his face. "Maria, are you all right? Let me see." "I'm fine, Mr. Cole," Maria said, though her cheek was still red, her hands were still trembling slightly, and dignity was the only thing holding her upright. "You're not fine. She hit you." He turned to Carol, who had appeared at the edge of the crowd, horror written across her face. "Get her some ice. And call it a night for her, full pay for the week, and I want to speak with her tomorrow, whenever she's ready." "That's not necessary, sir," Maria said quietly. "It is," Ethan said, and something in his tone left no room for argument. He turned back to Vanessa, and the ballroom's soft string quartet music, still playing obliviously in the background, suddenly felt grotesque against the tension in the hallway. "My study. Now," Ethan said to Vanessa, and walked away, without waiting to see if she followed. She followed. What happened in that study over the next hour is something only two people know in full detail, but the shape of it became clear to the household staff, and eventually the wider world, in the days that followed. Ethan asked her, calmly at first, why she had accused an innocent woman of theft in front of 40 guests. Vanessa, cornered and unraveling, made the fatal mistake of trying to justify it. The maid had been suspicious. She'd been acting strange. She'd been getting too comfortable in the household. It was this last phrase that made Ethan go very, very still. "Too comfortable," he repeated. "Vanessa, she's an employee. She's not a threat to you." And that was when Vanessa, exhausted, drunk, and finally out of options, told him the truth, or most of it.
The debt.
Her father's collapsing firm. The pressure to marry quickly. The skimmed household funds she'd been quietly funneling toward her family for months, dressed up as vendor deposits and wedding expenses. Ethan sat in stunned silence as it all poured out of her, and when she finally stopped talking, the study was so quiet you could hear the string quartet still playing faintly through the walls. "You've been stealing from me," he said finally. "Not a question. I was going to pay it back. And you let a woman who has never lied to me, who has shown more integrity in 8 months than you've shown in 4 years of dating me, take the blame for something you did to yourself." His voice finally cracked, not with tears, but with a controlled fury that was somehow worse. "You hit her, Vanessa. In my house. In front of everyone." I panicked. "You've been panicking for months," Ethan said. I just didn't want to see it. He didn't shout. He didn't throw anything. He simply stood up, walked to the study door, and opened it. The engagement is over, he said quietly. I'll have Carol arrange transportation for your things. Don't come back to this house. Vanessa left the estate that night in a town car, mascara streaked, phone already ringing with her father's frantic calls, and the Chicago Society pages would spend the next month dissecting what exactly had happened at the Cole rehearsal dinner, though the full truth, the debt, the theft, the slap, would take even longer to fully surface. But that's not the part of the story that mattered most to Ethan Cole. What mattered was walking down to the small guest bathroom off the kitchen, where Carol had set Maria up with an ice pack and a cup of tea she hadn't touched, and finding her sitting quietly, composed, staring at nothing in particular. You didn't have to fight for me like that, Maria said when she saw him in the doorway. I would have been all right. You shouldn't have had to be all right, Ethan said, sitting down across from her. You shouldn't have been hid in my house at all. Maria managed a small, tired smile. In my experience, Mr. Cole, the people with the most don't always treat people with the least very well. I've made peace with that a long time ago. It doesn't mean it doesn't sting. Ethan was quiet for a moment, studying her. Really studying her. Maybe for the first time in 8 months. How did you know? That she had the ring in her other hand. I didn't know, Maria admitted. But I noticed she'd been holding that napkin all night without setting it down, even to eat. People don't hold on to things that tightly unless there's something inside worth holding on to. Ethan almost laughed, despite everything. You pay more attention to this house than I do. It's my job to notice things, Maria said simply. It's easier to do a good job when you actually care about the people you're doing it for. If someone had told you 8 months ago that the quietest person in the room would end up being the strongest one in it, would you have believed them? Ethan certainly hadn't. But sitting there in that small kitchen bathroom, ice pack sweating in Maria's hand, guest bathroom tile cold under their feet, he found himself believing it completely. The weeks that followed were quiet in the way houses get quiet after a storm passes through. Not empty, but changed. Vanessa's family's scandal broke publicly 3 weeks later, when a business journalist uncovered the extent of Kingston and Associates' hidden debt, and the story of the broken engagement suddenly made a great deal more sense to Chicago's social circles. Vanessa herself moved out of state to live with an aunt in Arizona, and while Ethan never spoke publicly about the details of what happened that night, he made sure, quietly, through his lawyers, that the skimmed household funds were repaid in full and that no criminal charges would follow, out of a strange, tired mercy he couldn't fully explain even to himself. Maria returned to work 3 days after the incident, though Ethan had told her repeatedly she didn't need to rush back. I need the normalcy, she told him honestly. Sitting at home just gives me time to think, and thinking isn't always good for me right now. He understood that more than she knew. Something had shifted between them, subtle but undeniable. Ethan began coming home earlier, not every day, but more days than not. He started appearing in the kitchen in the evenings, not to hover or supervise, but simply to exist in the same space, asking Maria about her day in a way that felt increasingly less like small talk and increasingly like he actually wanted to know. Diego wants to know if you're a real billionaire or a pretend one, Maria told him one evening, unable to hide her smile as she chopped vegetables for the staff dinner. He saw you on the news. What did you tell him? That you're a real one who forgets to eat lunch most days, and once asked me how the washing machine worked. Ethan laughed, a real laugh, unguarded, the kind his board members and business partners rarely got to see. That washing machine has too many buttons. It has 4 buttons, Mr. Cole. 4 very confusing buttons. It was a small moment, ordinary even. But ordinary moments were exactly what had been missing from Ethan's life for years, buried under boardrooms and mergers, and a fiancée who had never once asked him how his day actually was. He started asking about Diego by name. He quietly arranged, through Carol, for a scholarship fund at Diego's school that had nothing to do with Maria directly, so it would never feel like charity aimed at her, just an opportunity that happened to exist. When Maria's mother needed a hip surgery that insurance wouldn't fully cover, Ethan paid the remainder through an anonymous hospital fund and never once mentioned it, though Maria eventually pieced it together and confronted him gently about it over coffee one morning.
"You didn't have to do that," she said.
"I know," Ethan replied. "I wanted to. People are going to talk. Your fiancé's scandal isn't even cold yet, and now she paused, searching for the right word. Being kind to the housekeeper? Is that what this is?" Ethan asked, and there was something in his tone that made Maria's chest tighten. Kindness to the housekeeper? Maria didn't answer right away. The truth was, she'd felt something shifting too, something she'd been carefully, deliberately not naming, because naming it felt dangerous. He was still her employer. The class difference between them was a canyon, not a crack, and she had a son to protect, a life she'd rebuilt piece by careful piece since her husband died. She couldn't afford to fall for a fantasy that could evaporate the moment reality reasserted itself. "I think," she said slowly, "that you should be careful about what you're offering, Mr. Cole. Not everyone can afford to hope the way you can." It was the most honest thing anyone had said to Ethan Cole in years, and it landed harder than any boardroom rejection ever had. He didn't push. That, more than anything, was what began to change Maria's mind. He gave her room. He kept showing up, not with grand gestures, not with a kind of performative romance that fills gossip columns, but with steadiness, consistency, the quiet, unglamorous proof that he meant what he said. Months passed. Autumn turned into winter, and the Cole estate, usually so cold and formal, began filling with small, warm changes. Diego's crayon drawings appearing on the refrigerator in the staff kitchen, then eventually in Ethan's study, taped crookedly beside a framed photo of his own late mother. Maria's laughter, once carefully rationed and professional, started coming easier, freer. It was Diego, in the end, who said what everyone else had been too careful to say out loud. He was sitting at the kitchen island one evening, swinging his legs, watching Ethan attempt, badly, to help Maria fold a fitted sheet. "Are you going to marry my mom?" Diego asked, matter of fact, the way only a 6-year-old can be. The fitted sheet fell out of Ethan's hands entirely. Maria nearly dropped her end too, cheeks flushing. "Diego," she started. "I'm just asking," Diego said, shrugging. "Because you smile a lot more now. And he brought me a baseball glove, even though I don't even play baseball yet." Ethan crouched down to Diego's eye level, the way Maria always did, and considered the question with the same seriousness he'd give a billion-dollar merger. "I'd like to someday. If your mom will have me, would that be all right with you?" Diego considered this with great importance. "Only if you learn to fold the sheet right. You're really bad at it." Ethan laughed, and so did Maria, and for a moment the enormous kitchen felt exactly as warm and unremarkable as any ordinary family's kitchen anywhere in the country, which was, perhaps, the most extraordinary thing that had ever happened inside those walls. It was almost a year to the day since that rehearsal dinner when Ethan proposed, not in a ballroom, not in front of 40 society guests, but in the small kitchen where they'd spent so many quiet evenings, Diego asleep upstairs, a simple ring in a simple box, no cameras, no announcement, no performance at all. "I know this isn't the world you grew up expecting," Ethan said, kneeling on the same tile floor where Maria had once iced her bruised cheek. "And I know loving someone like me comes with complications you never signed up for. But I've never in my life felt as much like myself as I do in this kitchen, with you and Diego, folding sheets badly and burning garlic bread on purpose because Diego likes it extra crispy." Maria laughed through tears she hadn't expected. "That garlic bread is a crime against Italian cooking. Marry me anyway." She said yes. The wedding, when it came, was small, nothing like the extravagant affair Vanessa had once planned. Renata stood beside Maria. Carol cried through the entire ceremony. Diego, insisting on wearing his baseball glove despite the tuxedo Ethan had bought him, walked the rings down the aisle with the seriousness of a Supreme Court bailiff. It hadn't all been easy. There had been a night, 2 months before the proposal, when Maria nearly walked away from the whole thing. A photographer had caught Ethan and Maria leaving a small neighborhood diner together. Nothing scandalous, just dinner, just laughter over a shared plate of pancakes, and by morning, the tabloids had run a story with a headline cruel enough to make Maria's stomach turn. "Billionaire's new fling. From the kitchen to his bed? Comment sections filled with strangers speculating about her, reducing 8 months of quiet integrity down to a punchline about gold-digging maids and desperate rich men. She'd shown up at the estate the next morning ready to quit. Not because of what strangers thought of her, she'd survived worse, but because she was terrified of what it would do to Diego, growing up under that kind of scrutiny, learning too early that the world would always see his mother as an opportunist before it saw her as a person. "I can't do this to my son," she told Ethan, standing in his study, arms crossed protectively over her chest. "He doesn't deserve to be a headline." Ethan had listened, really listened, before he said a word. Then he'd picked up his phone, called his head of communications, and within 48 hours, a carefully worded statement had gone out. Not an apology, not a denial, but a firm, dignified confirmation that Maria Torres was a woman of remarkable character whom he was proud, not ashamed, to be building a life with. He didn't do it to silence the critics. He did it because Maria had spent 8 months protecting the dignity of a house that wasn't hers, and it was long past time someone protected hers in return. "You didn't have to do all that," Maria said quietly, reading the statement on his phone screen. "I know," Ethan said, echoing the same 2 words he'd say again, months later, in that same kitchen. "I wanted to." She hadn't walked away. She'd stayed, not because the world had suddenly become kind, but because for the first time in a long time, she had someone standing beside her instead of behind glass, watching from a safe distance while she carried the weight alone. Ethan Cole, a man who had built an empire on calculated risk and cold precision, learned in the end that the most valuable thing he'd ever found wasn't in a boardroom or a bank account. It was in a woman who had never once needed his money to have dignity, a woman who had shown him, without ever meaning to, that quiet strength will always outlast loud cruelty, and that the truest measure of a person isn't what they have, but how they treat the people who have nothing to offer them in return. Maria Torres never forgot where she came from. She never let the wealth change the way she treated the household staff who now, in a strange twist of fate, worked for her too. And every year, on the anniversary of that terrible, transformative rehearsal dinner, she would find Ethan and simply say 4 words. "Check your other hand." And he would laugh, every single time, and pull her close, grateful that some slaps in life end up opening doors instead of closing them. If this story moved you the way it moved me while writing it, do me a favor, hit that like button, and if you're not subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community of storytellers and dreamers. Drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done in Maria's shoes? And if you know someone who needs a reminder that quiet strength always wins in the end, share this video with them. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.